And within the university system, no, I must place the unions in proper participation for
Hello and welcome to the program. I am DEJI360. The Nigerian government is seeking to borrow $29.96 billion over the next 3 years to address the country's overwhelming infrastructure deficit. In Naira terms and at the official exchange rate, that's the current official exchange rate now, that would be 9.12 trillion Naira. As of June this year, Nigeria's total debt profile was 16.3 trillion. If you add what the country now intends to borrow, the total debt would come up to something around 25.42 trillion naira. Well, we're not absolutely sure of that figure, and it just might change, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens. But don't forget, the Senate still has to approve this new borrowing plan of the president. And of course, President Buhari has sent that request to the National Assembly detailing what the money would be used for. Minister of Finance Kemi Adeosun, in a statement on last Thursday, actually said the loans will come from agencies such as the World Bank, Africa Development Bank, China Exim Bank, and other development agencies like the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, JICA. Now, she also says out of the total amount, federal government will take $25.8 billion, while the states will get $4.1 billion. She gave a further breakdown by saying that $18.3 billion will be spent on infrastructure development. And of that amount now, $14.6 billion will go to federal projects and $3.7 billion will go to state projects. But you know what? The Debt Management Office has been weighing in on the planned debt, recommending that government could borrow up to $22.08 billion or 6.73 trillion naira, warning that, that's this next year, I should say, warning that anything above that could breach the debt threshold the country has set for itself, and that we don't need to go beyond that limit now for next year, so as the country can maintain its borrowing limit of 19.39% of GDP. So basically the government has said this money will go into infrastructure, but we wait and see what the Senate or the National Assembly now would have to say, because a number of people have actually been kicking against it. As a matter of fact, the PDP has said the National Assembly should reject the request by the president, but we just have to wait and see how the National Assembly deals with this. Well, joining me now to discuss this issue of Nigeria's debt further is Mr. Johnson Chukwu, who is the CEO of Cowrie Asset Management, an investment banker here in Lagos. Mr. Chukwu, thank you very much for joining us on the program. 9.12 trillion naira. That's almost $30 billion. That's quite huge. Should we be worried about this?
Well, I'm not worried about it. To the extent that I looked at the purpose of which the borrowing is meant for. And I feel a significant portion of that borrowing will go into critical infrastructure that will help economic recovery and economic growth. The issue about debt is not that debt itself is bad. What is bad is if debt is borrowed for the purpose of consumption. About 61% of the amount that will be borrowed will be invested in critical infrastructure. So for me, that is a source of encouragement, a source of excitement for me. But the areas I would have done a few things differently. One of those is the specific infrastructure that are going to be invested in, or the corridors of some of those critical airlines that are going to be built. Those are some of the areas I could say there are opportunities for some little adjustments. But in terms of the volume, it's a 3-year rolling borrowing plan, 2016 to 2019. It's not going to be borrowed once, and if it is effectively invested, it will help expand the size of the economy and actually improve our capacity to earn income.
Is it a concern? Because, I mean, there's been concern that you know, it's one thing to say you want to actually borrow. It's a different thing to actually get someone to want to lend you money. Do you think Nigeria could have a problem with, you know, getting lenders? I mean, getting people now, especially, I'm talking about especially lending internationally now, getting people now to want to lend to this country, given our economic situation and given what we're facing with the price of oil?
Well, I think if you look at, based on the information that came out from the Ministry of Finance, only about 4.5 billion of the 29 billion borrowing will be coming from a commercial source, that is the Eurobond. The balance of that money will come from basically bilateral, multilateral agencies, and from my understanding, it will be basically concessionary loans that are going to be long tenured at very low rates. If they are concessionary loans, they'll be coming from our counterparties. Some of those funds may not come in form of cash. For instance, if a country is going to be providing us funding for some of the rail corridors, a lot of the funding could come in form of technical assistance, income of input, income of equipment, instead of cash. So, but most importantly, what matters to me is that this economy has potential for growth, and it is partly constrained by the lack of infrastructure. If you build the right infrastructure, government earnings will improve, overall GDP size will increase, and government capacity to service debt will also improve. The problem we've had in the past is that most of the borrowing that the country has indulged in, we are borrowed for consumption purposes, for which there was no physical infrastructure, there was no capital infrastructure that was built that could generate revenue, future revenues, and those revenues could have been used to service the debt. So when you borrow for consumption, you are obviously going into a debt trap, which unless you are able to grow your revenue to service that debt, you will never be able to meet the debt service obligations. But for this time, for the first time, the government says they want to borrow principally for capital expenditure, principally to build a critical infrastructure. I said, for me, some of the corridors, for instance, the rail lines, are quite appealing to me. Take, for instance, the Lagos Kano standard gauge rail. They want to build one corridor from Lagos to Ibadan, and another corridor from Abuja, from Kano to Kaduna. Those are commercially viable corridors. The area I would actually think they should adjust is a corridor that will run from Calabar through Port Harcourt to Onne, because that short corridor is not the critical economic corridor and may not be able to generate the kind of immediate cash flow benefit, economic multiplier benefit, that would generate the revenues for the servicing of the debt.
It would appear that would be more of a political decision than economic, so to speak.
Yes, for me, but even if you are looking at political and servicing the interests of the South-South and South-East, for instance, there's nothing that starts from building a corridor that runs from Onne Deep Seaport through Port Harcourt to Aba to Onitsha, through Nnewi, and then you will help open up that channel of productive activities, Aba industrial layout, Onitsha industrial layout, and Nnewi industrial layout. Those are corridors that have potential for quick economic growth, expansion. And then you will be able to evacuate whatever is produced in those locations to the seaports, and also easily bring in goods from the seaport to those corridors. I think that would have made more economic sense than doing a loop that runs from Calabar through Port Harcourt to Onne, because it does not really straddle a critical export or import zone.
Let us still talk about this debt. I mean, you have the DMO coming out to say that that the government should not borrow beyond 22.08 billion next year if it intends to keep borrowing at acceptable limits. That's under 19.39%. What do you make of that?
Well, you know, critically, one of the things that the DMO said that they defined the yield or the cost of funds that could become injurious or could become a burden if the country borrows more than 22 billion. But like the minister said, most of the borrowing we are referring to now are going to be concessionary borrowing. And that means you're talking of 1%, 2%, and maybe some instances you have a long period of grace period, that there's no interest or principal repayment. And that will help you build that infrastructure to a point where it becomes operational. And like I said, the key thing shackling this economy is lack of infrastructure. If we have the right infrastructure, I believe that we'll be able to even improve our ease of doing business, our competitiveness, our position in competitiveness index, so that the productive activity, the manufacturing activities actually spring up. And then you'll be able to begin to produce more things than crude for export. And those exports will help you improve your foreign exchange earnings. I'm not worried about the size of the borrowing. I'm only particular about the purpose of that borrowing. And for me, today this country can borrow. The borrowing should go to specific infrastructure. We should find ways of reinvesting whatever we are borrowing to ensure that it doesn't go out of that infrastructure for which it is meant. And then we should supplement that by granting concession to for some commercially viable infrastructure to the private sector to build entirely and have under build, operate, and transfer.
So basically, what you're saying is what the DMO is saying is not something we should be worried about?
Yes, for me, it's not something to worry about to the extent that, look, if we borrow beyond a particular cost threshold and we borrow more than 22 billion, the burden could be too heavy for the country's revenue to service. But again, the Minister of Finance has said that most of the borrowing, apart from the 4.5 billion they expect to come from Eurobond, will be largely concessionary loans from our multilateral and bilateral partners. So if that be the case, I don't think the burden, because in these concessionary loans, you're going to have grace periods for interest and principal repayment, and which be a long period of time that which you are not supposed to service the debt. That will give us the opportunity to build these assets to the point where they begin to generate revenue. And like I've always said, if we build a critical infrastructure, we will improve the cost of doing business in the country. We improve our competitiveness in terms of productive activities. Then we'll be able to catalyze other manufacturing and productive activities so that the revenue from those sources will offset whatever incremental cost we have to carry in servicing the debt or the payment of the principal.
What we've been told now is that if we borrow this money at the end of the day, it will see our external debt now rise to about 150% in 2 years. Is that a cause for concern?
Well, that's true. The external debt will rise, but the key things has our GDP plateaued. Will this borrowing help us to further expand the size of the GDP? Will this borrowing help us to expand our foreign exchange earnings in terms of, one, improving what Nigerians can export cost effectively, and also reducing what we import because we can now produce effectively some of the things we import? Will it improve our balance of trade and our balance of payment? If ultimately building the right infrastructure will lead to this country becoming an effective and cost-efficient productive economy, then ultimately the savings we are going to get from the reduction in imports will offset whatever incremental burden we have to carry in terms of debt service and repayment.
Finally, let me ask you, what exactly, because we've seen people who have come out to say, well, that the country really doesn't need to borrow, that all the country needs to do is to embark on some cost-cutting measures, if you like, and save money from, what they call plug the leakages in government. If you were speaking to those people now, what exactly would you be telling them?
Well, what I always look at it is that it depends on how fast we want to develop this economy. If we really want to develop this economy in our lifetime or the lifetime of our children, we need to borrow, we need to concession some infrastructure. We don't have a single world-class highway. We only have one standard gauge road around from Abuja to Kaduna. We do not have a modern airport. We do not have the basic infrastructure that you need to make this economy competitive. So if we're going to be living on our incremental earnings by just cutting costs, then certainly we're never ever build an economy that will compete in the world. For me, I think that would be a suboptimal approach to economic development. The key things are that we should borrow, but we must reinforce whatever we have borrowed so that the process of that borrowing, it goes exclusively to the infrastructure for which it is meant. We should support even the borrowing by granting concession to some of the commercially viable infrastructure and allow private sector to bring in capital to build them. If we do not take these two approaches, we are never, as a country, going to build the infrastructure that we need to make this economy productive.
Mr. Johnson Chukwu, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for your thoughts as always. Well, we'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about toll gates returning to Nigerian roads. Every day, every hour, and every minute, news break in Nigeria. Things happen so fast, it's most times difficult to track and comprehend them. But that's what we do right here on DEJI360. 2015, would you want to come back again?
It's like asking Jesus Christ if he knew he was going to die, will you want to come back as the savior of the world again?
We do not just help you track the stories, we break them down, explore all the angles, analyze the issues so that you can fully comprehend the stories and use them to make the right decisions.